Nadrich, mindfulness author and columnist at DailyClout. My guest today is Dr. Azadeh Khatibi, who graduated Phi Beta Kappa from UCLA with highest honors in molecular, cell, and developmental biology. She attended UCSF School of Medicine and also has 2 master's degrees from UC Berkeley, one in public health and the other in health and medical sciences. In addition to being a scientific investigator, Dr. Khatibi is also a filmmaker and a mentor for mindfulness. She has lectured and taught mindfulness practices to both children and adults, including cancer patients. Hi, Azadeh. So nice to have you here today.
Ora, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to spend this time with you.
So, it was so wonderful for me to hear that you're a mindfulness teacher. And as a mindfulness teacher myself, let's talk about your journey to mindfulness. I'd love to hear about it.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I'm so grateful for is having that skill set and having that lifestyle of mindfulness. And it took a while to get there. Growing up, I was a very introspective child and I had this rich inner life. And I was in Iran. That's where I was born. And during the revolution, so that I was born around the time of the revolution, that was also around the time of the Iran-Iraq war. So I remember being a child and being, we would turn off the lights at night and we would be bombarded and you didn't know if you were going to die that night or not. So then we came to America. There was immigration has its own stressors, especially for children. And especially if you don't have your emotions processed with an adult, right? You're just holding it in. So throughout that time, there was a lot of opportunity for wounding, for trauma, potentiating dysregulation. And we came to America, and fortunately, I was a very bright child. And I think that's what helped carry me through, despite all that hardship, having something, that intellectual curiosity. I was able to channel all that, my energies into that, kind of repressed a lot of the emotions, and went through, did really well. And ultimately it was in medical school where I was introduced to mindfulness. And it was, I thought a medical school would be something very different than what I found out that it was. But I remember this one day we had this opportunity as like an elective on a Saturday to go and spend a day on this kind of Buddhist retreat in a yurt where we got to spend time with people who were introducing us to mindfulness practices. I got to meet a doctor who said something, and I was just so nascent. This was so nascent in my journey to mindfulness. It was so at the beginning of it, but I remember he said something about taking time in between patients to wash his hands and watching the water run over his hands. And that was the time, right, in between potential, even in ophthalmology, like life and death issues. He was, because sometimes you have systemic diseases that manifest in the eye that you have to catch. He was taking that time to center. And I remember thinking, that's so beautiful. That's what I want. That's what I've needed all my life. And, but it was just one day. And I was thinking to myself, why don't we do this all the time in medicine?
Yeah, I just got to tell you, when you just said that, I was so surprised to hear this, because you are the first doctor I have ever spoken to, even some of my personal friends who are doctors, that has ever mentioned that mindfulness was talked about and or taught, even presented in medical school or in the medical milieu, if you will. So I'm very surprised to hear this. I mean, I'm shocked it's not taught everywhere, from the schools to the medical schools to colleges to elementary preschool environments. So that's very surprising and exciting to hear.
It was, so I went to school at UC San Francisco. So San Francisco, it's a little bit more progressive in some ways. And so this was something that some parts of the community already practiced. And so they were trying to maybe integrate it. But this was just a one-time opportunity that I could tell the people around me who went for that day, it wasn't a lot of students. It was maybe 12 students. who had self-selected themselves and were attracted to this idea of spending a day off to go and do this in a yurt. And it was, so it wasn't really integrated into the curriculum at that point. It was just a one-off elective, but it was lovely. And it was really hard to come back to the what I call sociopathic medical training model, and to have to reintegrate myself after spending this beautiful day in a calm, supportive environment where you could really center yourself and connect to the oneness within yourself and to the oneness outside of yourself. And then to come back to the hustling, bustling medical milieu, Western medical milieu, where you're waking up super early, people are burned out, people are reactive, people are rushing, the patients aren't getting enough rest, right? They're all stressed out. Everybody, and there's like weird power hierarchies. Like, it was just the opposite. It was the opposite of like a mindful way of being. So that was really hard. So I was thinking to myself, well, why, if this is better? And at that time, I didn't even know anything about the decades of research that had gone into mindfulness and the neuroscientific effect of mindfulness, or the neuroscientific realities of mindfulness. But now, a couple decades later, even when I started working, they introduced mindfulness to us in the institution where I was working at. And I was like, this is great. This is wonderful. And I remember one of the head doctors saying that the mindfulness program was so great that now he wakes up and greets the dawn every morning with meditation. So he wakes and meditates with the sun. And I remember looking at him, thinking to myself, my life is so not like that. He was like almost to retirement age. And I said, I want that. And he said, it's not a big deal. But of course, to me, I was like, no, it is a big deal. There was like instinctual reality. There was like these instincts within me that like, waking up with the sun, with the dawn is a good idea. And being well rested to do that is a good idea. And meditating in calmness in the morning is a good idea. I just knew this inside of myself somehow, even though I hadn't been exposed to the research around it. And to have him kind of poo-poo it, his own life choices it was really disheartening to me. Later on, now I see there's a lot more of a push to put mindfulness into medical establishments. And of course, you see this in business, but they're doing it in medicine, especially because administration is realizing the huge problem of burnout.
Yeah.
I think it's even more. I think it's moral injury to people who are practicing medicine, because now a lot of them work for corporate type entities and there's a structure and their needs aren't being met. And so it's very easy for administration to say, just practice mindfulness. Here, take a mindfulness program. We require you to take mindfulness.
Yeah, so but it's not as prevalent as I think it should be by now. I've been a mindfulness practitioner for, I was a mindfulness meditation teacher and I'm a mindfulness author. And I've taught mindfulness in the workplace and mindfulness at schools. And I'm seeing it's great that even if it's a slow trickle, but of all of the areas that it's needed the most, it's in the medical field. Because when you talk about this neuroscientific, studies that are done with the benefits of mindfulness and meditation, it's still like you kind of almost have to go looking for it. Yeah. It's not, I don't know of it being a requirement within the curriculum of, certainly Western or allopathic medicine teachings, which seems so strange to me. And then you fast forward to the way in which it's so absent within the medical milieu, which is going to segue right into what's happened over the last 3 years and what a horrible place the medical system and environment is in today, with the very lacking of the thing that we're talking about, which is mindfulness. It's shocking. And I'm sure for you, with the impeccable education that you've had, it must be just shocking to see where this has come to.
Oh, yeah, it's tremendously shocking to me. And, I think just kind of looking at it from the point of view of my hindsight, seeing that like they introduced mindfulness to me as a way to, now I realize in my workplace, they were introducing it to prevent burnout in me because the system was already so toxic and people were so dissatisfied and people were leaving. So that's why they were trying to make people not be burned out. But then during the work day, there was no culture of mindfulness, right?
Right.
So it wasn't like, it was just like, we're going to teach you some stuff, you do it on your own. And of course, people don't have time. A lot of people still didn't have the knowledge. So then you fast forward to what happened during the COVID times. Again, there's no institutional desire for it. Insofar as they only want it because they want good workers that are stable and emotionally regulated, who can then toe the party line.
Yeah, but you have to really look at what happened with the so-called pandemic and what happened with the whole COVID rollout and the heightened state of fight or flight fear that everybody was in the way in which these systems were functioning out of fear. And for me, the very thing that was missing was a mindful awareness of what was going on. And it's very sad to see what's happened to the medical environment, and it's revealed how broken it really is. So if something like mindfulness, and I know you and I could spend the entire time together just talking about that, just talking about the need for mindfulness, it showed to me as a mindfulness practitioner and author that how devoid it was in the medical system, that doctors were functioning from a place out of fear. There wasn't a mindful awareness of how to approach healing and how to approach addressing our body's natural immunity. And what I say in my book, Time to Awaken, one should never make a decision about their health when they are in a state of fear.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you of all people, being a doctor, again, I can't, say that enough. It must have been really shocking and probably heartbreaking to see what was happening within your own community, your own profession, your own profession.
Absolutely. There was definitely, one of the basic tenets of mindfulness is that cultivating a sense of equanimity, and also cultivating a sense of present moment awareness.
Yes.
And I expected people that I thought would be thoughtful, more than the general population. I expected doctors to be more thoughtful, less reactive, have more equanimity, more present moment awareness, right? To be able to look at data instead of being in fear. But then I would go on like my physician Facebook groups and try to have conversations. And I was just met with reactivity, intolerance of other viewpoints.
I know
that I was just like, and like attacking people.
I know, but Azadeh, you do understand you're talking about a majority of doctors that are not versed in mindfulness, which is already part of the problem, if not the main problem. I'm not just to attack the area, the medical field. This goes into all sectors. This goes into all areas. That for me, I believe that the thing that was lacking was a mindful awareness of what was happening and how our world had changed so radically, and that decisions were made out of fear. And as a mindfulness teacher yourself, that with the awareness, with present moment awareness, you will make decisions not out of fear. So here we are, you and I clearly understand this language. We understand this invaluable teaching. And I really want to talk about your medical training and work and how you've dealt with the impediments that you call to living a mindful life. So you find yourself, let's fast forward to the time of the pandemic, to the time of this tremendous fear mongering that everybody was held hostage in a state of fear. How does that affect, or how did that affect your life directly as a doctor?
Well, so I was in the beginning, I'm trying to stay open. I'm like, okay, well, what's going on? Let's figure it out. Let's accumulate data. I was trying to, and this is something I was trying to grasp a little bit while I was trying to maintain my equanimity, I was still grasping for some sense of security, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea, of course, in mindfulness teaching is you're never going to always be in a secure place. It's always going to be changing. But once I started seeing that I couldn't, have these conversations and there was so much reactivity, I kind of withdrew and isolated myself a lot. And I think the lockdowns really potentiated that as well. I was just with my family more. I was just kind of insulated. because I wasn't practicing medicine at that time specifically, actually, but I was just seeing this stuff. And I just, actually, it gave me more time and more awareness to see these toxic patterns versus someone who's like reactively just trying to like make it, just trying to live day to day, moment by moment, to try to live reactively. They may not have that. And that's another thing, like in the medical practice, most doctors, and this is me, before I started my mindfulness journey, I was just starting to learn it. I didn't even have time. I was so exhausted and so burned out. I didn't even have time to like think about my own life, let alone try to put the pieces together and see my life and the medical system in the larger sphere of things, right? And so what I just saw is, I just saw there was a lack of equanimity in people, the lack of present moment awareness. And then the thing that really was heartbreaking for me was a lack of loving kindness. When I had interactions in these database, what I was hoping for would be data-based intellectual conversations with doctors about, what the data is showing, what the certain medical interventions help or don't help. I was trying to come from it from a place of loving kindness, and I wasn't getting that back from people, right? It was very like, you're wrong, how stupid of you.
Oh yeah. I'm
I'm
sure you're under attack for that, as I know many doctors were. It was a real schism. It was a real divide between the doctors that were, really honoring the ethical and the moral duty that they have to their patients. I mean, look at Dr. Zev Zelenko, who I think was heroic in what he attempted to do.
Bless him. Yes. Yeah.
Your job as a doctor is to save your patients' lives, to do what's in their best interest. And doctors were suppressed and oppressed, and cancel culture and censorship. I mean, I actually feel so bad for doctors. I think and nurses, I think they got the worst end of it, in that here they were just trying to help patients and keep them alive. And if you were a doctor that was even trying to do that, you were vilified or you were canceled.
Or you were thrown out of so people kept their mouth shut, because who wants to get thrown out of their Facebook group where they have some semblance of connection for saying the wrong thing, right? Like, and so what I ended up doing was I just stopped talking, because I was like, I still want this resource, right? I want these groups to be, but I don't want to be canceled out of them. So I'm just not going to interact anymore. So I became very isolated, which was not good. And I look back, and this is kind of one of the things that I try to do, is I try to take negatives that happen in my life and turn them into positives. And so I, became very kind of self-isolated. I started thinking very negatively. And what I should have done, I should have doubled down on my mindfulness practices. Instead of just doing that minimum, not minimum, but like that regular amount of meditation I did a day, should have doubled it or maybe even tripled it. I should have, what else? I could have doubled down on those healthy routines, those healthy schedules that I had, have even more loving kindness to myself. And then also double down on kind of awakening to my life, and maybe changing my routines to change my perspective a little bit too. So like do the things that nurtured me, but also put myself out there a little bit more. And really, I learned this pretty soon after the isolation, to really maintain that fabric of social interaction as much as possible. Because one of the things that I've learned in this COVID time is to have a strong tribe. And I did that as much as possible as I could for my children, because I knew that isolating my children wasn't going to be good. And that's one of the things I'm so glad I did. I was just like, you guys are socializing. You guys are going to be interacting, because I didn't want my kids to become depressed, anxious kids. And I already knew, like, I knew that the foundations of health is the physical, the emotional, mental, and the spiritual. You have to have that in balance. And I knew how important it was to have, for a teenager, to have that social interaction. So once I started integrating that social life back into our lives, it was just so much better. Pretty soon I realized this is not satisfying to me. Staying quiet is not what I'm meant to do. And I have to let go of this fear of being attacked. And I don't like the word thick skin, but I need to develop more emotional buoyancy after being attacked. So you're asking me, what is it? How did you handle all of this? I went back and I said, okay, where do I want to be? Where am I right now? What things have not served me? What things have served me? What do I need to do to develop this? And so I just said to universe, I just said out loud to myself and to the oneness, I said, I really want to get to a place of great freedom and being able to say what I believe without being afraid of being attacked. And if people attack me, that's okay, because that's one part of my character that I want to develop. And so how do I deepen into my role as a strong woman leader? What is needed of me in this time? And so I started praying more. There were other practices that I was doing. I got introduced to shamanism, and I faced my own fears and my own weaknesses, my dark shadows. And I worked actively to be less affected by people's reactionary behavior. So to have that equanimity, I developed my equanimity more. So no matter what was attacking me, I could be cool with it. I'm still not perfect at it, obviously. There's no such thing as perfection, but I'm so much stronger. And I developed more of that emotional buoyancy, and I opened up that throat chakra, and I just started speaking out more. And as I did, that isolation, that sense of smallness, the feeling that I had no power kind of melted away. And it was, negativity comes at you too, in addition to the positive people that you're inspiring by speaking out. But I did that, and then I went on this path of speaking out against Gavin Newsom signing this terrible bill in California into law, and I've just become more vocal as a result.
Good for you, and I commend you for that, because I will tell you this, we're both mindfulness practitioners, and I knew that I was not going to be led by fear. I was just not going to allow for that illusion to take hold of me. Now, look, when this first reared its ugly head and this so-called novel virus appeared, everybody initially, it's natural to go into a fight or flight state, because we're being told that something unprecedented has just occurred globally that has never happened before. Okay, so we're human, and even those of us that practice mindfulness and teach it, even we had our own, percentage of fear. Having said that, I think that you get to that phase. I know that when I wrote my recent book, Time to Awaken, people would say to me, literally, they would say, aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid to write this book? Aren't you afraid you wrote this book? Because at that point I had already written it, and I felt divinely guided to write that book. And I believe there's a reason why there are those of us that are guided. And when we speak of that oneness that we both understand so well, we know that we are in service for a reason, and that to keep our voices silent is part of the problem. It's not part of the solution. So I wrote my book. You spoke out against Gavin Newsom. You realized that you needed to open up your throat chakra and speak the truth. And that's what it's going to take to dismantle this narrative that is only standing on the shoulders of fear. That's all this is. This is just all about fear. And you and I both know that. And thank God there are a lot of us that know that. So tell our listeners what you did. Once you got it, once you said, I am not going to be focusing on the fear or the attacks, and you put that in motion to go, was it the AB 2098 lawsuit and the HPV vaccine mandate? Tell us about that, what you did and how you decided to go into that legal battle, if you will.
So what I was noticing was that, throughout these past several years, I started noticing that there were a lot of other doctors who were self-censoring themselves. They were chilling their speech, the term is called. They weren't speaking out because they were afraid of losing their livelihood, of being investigated by the medical board, of being shunned, being canceled. So people, and you have to, especially now, a lot of doctors are no longer in private practice. They're working for corporations or medical corporations. They don't want to lose their jobs, right? They've worked so hard. And this is the unethical thing. I think if you even as a doctor, if you are shutting up your mouth because you're afraid to lose your job and you're not acting ethically, that's terrible. And I think there's a lot of doctors who are acting unethically, right? Because they're putting their livelihood ahead of what they really believe is ethical medicine. And that's really, really wrong.
I don't even know how they could do
it. But it's hard.
It's hard. Do that? How can they do that? And all good.
Because you don't want to lose your job, because you have kids, you have dependents.
I understand that, but that's feeding
fear.
You're feeding the beast if you're doing
Absolutely. But again, it's like if everybody feels isolated by themselves and they don't even feel like they can talk to their neighbor, in the next clinic over about this stuff, it's very hard as an N of one to speak out Now, if we had been felt more open to talk openly about this stuff, it might not have turned that way. Maybe people would have been gathering around and going to administration or going to the medical hierarchy and being like, well, do we really need to push mandates, or whatever they felt? Or, can we talk about this vaccine, and is it more inflammatory, to have these conversations? But it was just, even people, my friends in private practice, they come up to me, they're like, I'm afraid to speak out, but good for you for speaking out. Thank you so much. And doctors on both sides of the political aisle, all sorts of backgrounds were saying this stuff to me. So I know there's a lot of doctors from many backgrounds who are self-censoring. And so when I was noticing this, especially in California, there was a law that was a bill that was introduced in California in 2022 called AB 2098 that basically said any doctor who engages in disinformation or misinformation can be investigated and have their medical license taken away by the medical board. And I looked at the writing of the law, and their definition of misinformation just didn't make sense to me. It was like false information, contrary to scientific, contradicting scientific consensus, contrary to standard of care. And I was like, this is grammatically incorrect. Consensus is not how you do medicine all the time, right? There's always the people ahead of the pack who are actually correct, and then the pack follows them, right? You can't just say the only correct thing is consensus in medicine, which is like the general agreement of what doctors think, like the general idea of what they agree on. And so I saw lots of problems and holes, and then putting that with this law, and then putting that with the self-censoring and the chilling of speech that I was seeing with doctors already, I said, this law is going to create even more badness. Plus, it was unnecessary. There's already stuff in the professional code in California, in law, that says like there's certain standards by which doctors have to follow. So this law was also redundant. And so I started speaking out about it on Twitter, opened up that throat chakra, bam. Even though I was scared, even, and this is the thing, even though there was fear, I looked at the fear. There's a Buddhist teaching. You look at, and I didn't understand this till I got really sick, which is another conversation if you want. But there was a teaching that it taught me, which was that you laugh at your fear, you look at your fear, you smile at it, and eventually get to a place of laughing at it. Now, I hadn't gotten to a place of like laughing at it, but at least I could smile at the fear and be like, I'm still going to go forward, and I'm going to start tweeting about this. And I went from like 20 Twitter followers to like 1,200 Twitter followers, like in like the span of a week or two. So I said, oh my God, what I'm saying, people are thirsty to hear. And then as I took action, there's another phrase that I love, which is action brings clarity. If you're not clear and you have the data and you don't know what to do, at a certain point, you have to just take the action and see where it goes. And if, that wasn't the best thing, I just want to kind of course correct. But if you take some action, it'll bring you some clarity. But if you sit there and you're just like, I don't know what to do, you're not going to go forward. And you're just going to swim in those thoughts over and over and over again. And so I did that, and this opportunity came for me to be a part of a lawsuit against AB 2098, especially after Gavin Newsom signed it. And I joined the lawsuit. And so far, we had our hearing in January, our first hearing. The judge was really great. He was like this deep thinking person who was not ruled by fear, right? He was he was like open to asking questions and being curious intellectually and pointing things out that he thought were ridiculous.
What a rare judge at this moment in time, this moment in history. Are you a judge on the right side of history or not? Clearly he was.
Yeah, and he's not afraid to take stances that were uncomfortable, which I really appreciate. And kind of morally guided, I felt from him. Of course, I can't say too much about the judge either because I just saw him on the bench, but like I just had this feeling that he was guided by a certain a moral compass within himself, where he was like, I need to do the right thing and I need to ask the right questions, and he'd done his homework. And I also feel like when I align myself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and I do that work that I was talking to you about, the meditation, the journaling, the exercise, the practicing my present moment awareness, the things that the action steps that I take come back to me. The results of that are so much more rich for me and so much better for me than if I don't do those aligning activities. And This is kind of getting into, when I feed myself and I align with the oneness with Source, good things happen.
There's nothing more powerful than that. I mean, think about it. If we really live our lives aligned with truth, and I mean knowing really what that truth is that there is non-separation, that there is oneness, that we are not meant to be polarized, which is the very thing that was manipulated and thrust upon us during this time. One has to just look at how polarized we were and ask ourselves, who was polarizing us? And we know how unnatural that is. And that goes against the grain of oneness 1000%. So
Yeah.
I think that when we align ourselves with the truth and we are, again, being used as a vessel to be the speakers
Yes.
of that truth, the universe stands behind us. I mean,
Yeah.
my book, Time to Awaken, it's my 5th book. It is, and I thought it was going to be very controversial. I thought that people were going to react to it in a way that was too frightening for them. It has been my most successful book to date. And people are so receptive. Thank you. Thank you so much. People are so receptive to it because, as you said, they're hungry for the truth. People, we know whether you're uncomfortable with the truth, whether you're not ready for the truth. I use it in the terms of being awake. And with mindfulness is being in the total moment with total awareness, which means you're awake. And right now we're living in a parallel universe with those that are choosing to be awake and those that are choosing to stay asleep and basically unconscious. But there are more of us that are waking up. And the type of work that you've done and I'm doing, and those of us, and there's quite a lot of us, thank God, that are really not being led by fear. So again, I so commend you, especially as a doctor. I've seen so many doctors that have been so afraid, and I met a doctor who works at one of the top hospitals in town. I'm not going to mention his name nor the hospital. He refused to get vaccinated. He believed in bodily autonomy and natural immunity. He was ostracized. This is one of the top doctors of this particular hospital. He was, as many were asked to not to practice there, including the nurses. The way in which nurses were treated and doctors was heinous. It was just unbelievable to hear the top caregivers, the ones that are there to, honor the HIPAA oath, to do what is in the best interest of a patient. And they were asked to leave, okay? He was asked to come back because guess what happened? There was suddenly a shortage of doctors.
Wow.
I mean, it's just crazy what they were willing to do to put people in harm's way by asking some of the top nurses and doctors in our hospitals to go against their own integrity, their own truth, again, being aligned with the truth, and asking them to leave. We will never forget this. We will never forget the crimes against humanity that were done during this time.
Right. The unethical care, or the unethical twisting of people's arms, basically making them get medical treatments under emotional duress, get coerced into doing medical treatments, right? Because you say you can't work if you don't do this medical treatment to your body. That's coercion, right? That's somebody getting a medical treatment under duress. That is incredibly unethical. One of my co-plaintiffs, Aaron Carrier, from UC Irvine, he was an ethics professor at UC Irvine. He spoke out, right? He didn't want to do things like kind of quietly. He said, this is wrong. It's unethical that you're mandating this vaccine. People are coming to me and telling me, and I need to stand up. They let their ethics professor go. UC Irvine let their head of ethics go and fired him because he was saying what you guys are doing is unethical. It's terrible. And one of the things that you talked about, and you said it so beautifully, is like when people are operating from fear, they're not going to think well. And when you think about the neuroscience of mindfulness, when you're operating in a place of fight or flight, the amygdala is just firing. Your amygdala is firing. And what happens when the amygdala is overstimulated and hyper firing? You lose access to your higher cortical thinking.
Right.
So it's harder to think. It's harder to balance information and data. It's harder to accumulate more information. It's harder to learn. This is neuroscience, guys. Like when you're operating from a place of hypervigilance, hyperarousal, hyper fear, you can't think clearly. You can't learn new information well. You can't access your higher cortical functioning. And so you're not operating from a place of optimum functioning. Wow. So all these doctors, all these nurses, these administrators, these politicians or lawmakers are operating from a place of not having access to the higher cortical function. And then when we combine that with how our systems, not just in medicine, but just in general, our systems are leading to burnout in people, and they're tired. They don't even have enough time. So that tired brain, along with the hyperarousal, just leads to chaos and dysregulation.
Right. But I do want to say, because I know that our conversation is almost over, I'm sorry to see that. There's so much more that we could talk about, that we all have the ability to have critical thinking skills. We really do. You don't have to be a mindfulness practitioner. You don't even have to ever have practiced a day of mindfulness. There is a reason. I don't know the whys. I don't think we have all the whys yet. That there were many of us that used our critical thinking skills, and we just asked questions. And I say, I've always been a dot connector. If something doesn't make sense, my intuition, or maybe perhaps, yes, there's the ways and where the brain works, or the neuroscientific, neurons firing the way in which they are, and we were disadvantaged by being in that fight or flight state. But we do know that there were millions of people that chose to stay in a state of fear, and there were those that did not. And that, to me, is part of the great mystery, is that perhaps we will come to know why. I say we live in a parallel universe, as I said, those that are awake and those that are asleep, and there's probably a reason for it. And we may not have the answers just yet, but I hope in our lifetime we will know why that is. And the only thing I can hope and pray for is that more people wake up.
Yeah. And conversations like this are going to be promoting that. And you said it so beautifully. Thank you. I think that when you're stuck, like they're stuck, it's very hard to be open to something new, to awaken, right? Especially the systems that people are in, it keeps them stuck. It keeps them small. It keeps them, right? The system is created to keep people busy and to keep them struggling. So it's hard to even have time to awaken. But I hope that this was a jolt that could bring that. And talking about alchemizing the negative to positive.
Yes.
I hope that one of the good things that comes out of this COVID chaos is that awakening in people. Yeah. I know it's already happening. And
I do too. I agree.
I pray that it grows.
Yes, I do too. I agree with you. And I thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing, and that you did speak your truth, and that you continue to speak your truth. And tell our listeners, how they could connect with you, or anything that you're doing moving forward that you'd like to let them know about.
Sure. I'm continuing to advocate for medical freedom. It's a passion of mine, and just freedom in general, freedom for Iran, freedom for our bodily autonomy, as well as advocating for mindfulness, and then with highly gifted people and highly sensitive people, advocating for an awareness about those kind of neuropsychological profiles and personalities. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Azadeh Khatibi, Azadeh, last name Khatibi, at Azadeh Khatibi. And on Instagram, I'm at Dr. Azadeh Khatibi, Drazadeh Khatibi. And I have a page on Facebook. You can check that out too.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again, Dr. Azadeh Khatibi, for being with us today, and the important work that you're doing and continuing to do. And thank you to our listeners for being here with us today. And don't forget to subscribe to DailyClout so you can keep up with our current content. And I will see you again soon.
Thank you for being a beacon for truth.
Oh, Ora. Thank you. Thank you so much, Azadeh. And thank you again for being here with us today.